This interview episode is brought to you by TYRI Off-Road. Lights for people that need to get shit done. Visit TYRIoffroad.com right now. That's TYRI offroad.com. Audio boys and girls, we're here. We're going to talk with Sal, and I think this is going to be interesting to a lot of individuals out there. And I suspect that people that don't even have one of these Jeeps, all of us are curious about them and wouldn't mind having one if we had infinite garage space. So Sal is the owner-operator of Vintage Jeeps, a Pennsylvania company centered around the vintage Jeep community and a source for aftermarket replacement parts. Man, I bet you people just look for things that like this that they just can't find anywhere. So rebuilding services and an innovative line of vintage Jeep exclusive product offerings. Sal has been in the Jeep community for over 20 years with a technical background in automotive science, matching. I should have made this font bigger. I was talking to you and I wasn't thinking about what I was doing. Now I've made it bigger. An industrial flow control and cryogenic market. Oh, cryogenics. That's always fascinated me. I hear that whenever you're, freezing the ring and pinion or whatever it is that you're trying to do, you can throw some really inexpensive razors, shaving razors, or those little big shaving things in there, and they really get sharp. They last a long time. He's a contributing writer for the Dispatcher magazine, a publication that caters towards the vintage Jeep community, and an avid off-roader. We love the avid off-roaders. Now, I'm not going to skip this part. I often forget about this, and I love making sure that you guys know where to go so that you can be looking at all the good stuff at these websites that we of our guests while we're talking. It's vintagejeeper.com. Doesn't get any simpler than that. Vintagejeeper.com. Sal, thanks a lot for being with us today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Yeah.
All right, man. So where do I get my super sharp razor blades?
Oh, gosh, it could be anywhere. Who knows, right? I mean, geez. Yeah.
No, I want them cryogenic. I want to know how I can get them cryogenically done for like next to nothing, because it has to be free.
Well, the interesting thing, so the cryogenic market, when I was doing the industrial side, so I was into we'll say like a sales engineer, technical sales, product manager and stuff like that. We catered towards the industrial gas market. So your oxygen, argon, CO2 and stuff like that. And part of that market was the cryogenic. So what we do is we freeze helium, we freeze nitrogen, and we play around with those gases, like air products and chemical and all those. They would, cryogenic market and stuff like that. So that industrial background really caters towards how I represent, whether parts I sell or services that I'm doing. I kind of use that technical background. So it's real savvy, and I get a little detailed when it comes to things of that nature.
Well, you have to be, especially dealing with something that's so cold, because something that cold can break or injure somebody.
Well, absolutely. And the interesting thing, too, is when you're working on, let's say, something like an old Jeep, right? They're very, very simplistic in design, and back in those days, Jeeps were meant to be rebuilt either by the dealership or the owner on a farm in a city and stuff like that. So it's a very unique mechanical working, if you would. And when it comes, I have a lot of the old Willys prints, or Willys, it depends on who you're talking to. But I have a lot of the old prints. And what's kind of interesting is to see the specifications, what they actually call out. And it's in, a relationship to why these parts are still around and why these Jeeps can still be rebuilt, and why, 70 years later, you're like, well, how is this thing still on the road? And it was a completely, different time back then, from the metallurgical standpoint to how things are being pieced together, which makes it very, very unique. Mm-hmm.
So correct me if I'm wrong on this, but my opinion has always been that any vehicle that you have is infinitely rebuildable. There should be no time, no expiration date of a vehicle other than what you might get to the point where you have to build your own parts because the parts may not be available.
That's another thing. So, every vehicle, let's say in the vintage side of things, is completely rebuildable. The raw steering box is rebuildable. Obviously the differentials, your most common areas, everything back in that time was marketed, and that was the big thing. It's marketed to be rebuildable. That was one of the selling points, is to be, that's how robust the unit is. And as as things started to grow, and even like when you get into the new stuff, some of the market is a little throwaway, but when you start throwing 70 plus or even 80-year-old parts like an old MB or GPW, you may have to whip out the lathe and the mill and start catering to variations and trying to make that work again. And that's also what makes it fun, is, in looking at this, well, if I take this out and I put it back in, it should work. Not when it's 80 years old. We may have to shave a little bit off of here and take into account in that regard. But yeah, crazy.
Well, clearances aren't nearly as as tight as what they used to. I mean, the tolerances back then aren't nearly as tight as what they are now. So does that make it easier to make things work and make things fit together, or is it more hope and a prayer that I got it right?
So it's a little bit of both. So like tolerances back in the day was relative to the technology, right? So I get a little techie. So I'm going to get a little techie on here.
That's fine.
So an 80 weight, 90 weight oil needs at a minimum 4 thousandths worth of clearance in order to get in there and do its job. Okay. Now, when you're looking at, let's say, a transmission, right? And I do a lot of transmissions. Guys that follow me, I'm always diving into transmission. The tolerance on that could be, clearance at 8, 10, 13 thousandths, but here's the thing. There was no standardization back in the day. I mean, you're using, there wasn't multi-viscosity oil. It was 30 weight. Grandpa put 30 weight in. Nowadays we have 10, 30, 530 and so forth. But as the technology changed and standards, tighter tolerances came into play, which now means that when we're rebuilding something or playing with something, we have to mix the old with the new. So there's a lot of head scratching, like, oh, why is this not working? Well, the bearing that you have is tighter than maybe it was back in the day.
Right.
And we have to take that into an account. So
yeah, I can imagine it'd be quite a nightmare making things work, especially with the technology that's that old. So let me ask you this. I don't want to jump too far ahead, but I'm really curious. Actually, let's find out the business that you have, Vintage Jeeper. You sell parts. What parts do you sell? For what Jeeps? Oh, and do you sell any Bronco parts? Because I got to ask that these days, because every Jeep company is selling Bronco stuff now. You don't have to answer that. I'm being facetious.
No, I think it's and I'll dab into that a little bit. So primarily what we cater in is from 1941 to essentially 1972, which is the classic era of Jeep. So when you start diving into the Willys aspect, and then when Kaiser decided to take over, we dab in those parts. And they're anywhere from restoration parts to kind of get the job done to parts that we make ourselves, engineer ourselves.
Interesting.
Which is kind of right. So that's kind of my outlet into it. That's my fun.
That sounds like that would be fun.
Now we do get into some of the AMC stuff. So the neat thing is, as a small business, you can only do so much, right? So we have access to all of the AMC stuff. However, my niche is that 41 to 72.
Okay.
And the reason I chose that range is that kind of defined what the Jeep community is today. And if you look at a JKU and maybe you stare at the windshield or down at the rim, you're going to see that iconic military Jeep on there. And there's a reason, is that paved the way for what everybody's driving now. And interesting enough, when the troops were, fighting overseas, a lot of them messaged John Willys, right? And they said, how can we get this on the market? We want, this is a Jeep that's helping us through battle, in good times and bad and things of that. Can this be offered here, in the States when we get back? And the interesting thing too, is when you look at an old Jeep, you're going to see the data plate, and you're going to see it's generally known as like Jeep Universal. And you have an industrial scene and you have an agricultural scene. And the universal is there because you'll see the old manuals will say Jeep Universal. And it's universal to those that are in the city and those that are in, farming life in rural areas. So it's a very unique, aspect. And that carried all the way until about 1972. Now, you did ask a question about Bronco parts. The interesting thing enough is there are a lot of interchangeability in some of the old Bronco parts. We'll snag some of that technology when you start playing around with, Saginaw conversions and kind of the neat stuff. We'll snag a little part. We won't tell anybody, but we'll snag a part. We'll throw it on and call it our own. So there is some interchangeability.
A vintage Jeeper might feel dirty if they know the truth.
And that's the thing is, even back in the day, between old Jeeps and Broncos, there wasn't kind of too much of what you see today between the Wrangler and the Bronco.
I'm sorry, when you say Bronco parts, you're talking about the '60s, the late '60s models, not the current day.
No, we don't touch that stuff. We let you guys touch that. But the interesting thing is, if you're going to narrow a Dana 44 and toss it in an old Jeep, right? So what you'll do is you can pick up a Wagoneer, what we call waggy axles, right? Narrow track. And we narrow them. We narrow the axle tubes, or one side of the axle tubes. Well, what fits in that one side that we narrow? It's a Bronco. We take some of those Bronco axles, and it makes it work, but majority of it's Jeep. So that's where we cater towards.
Right. And this is just, I would imagine when people start modifying their Jeep heavily, like what you're talking about doing, it makes it interesting going to an auto parts place and trying to explain to them what it is that you need. And I can imagine it's even worse with a 1941 to 72 Jeep and parts. You probably don't even go to our auto parts store for any of that stuff. Let me ask you this now, and in my knowledge of the older Jeeps is not very deep, so correct me on any of this, but weren't there 3 or 4 manufacturers of the early Jeeps? And how does that affect the parts that you go and that you're trying to replace?
Well, the interesting thing is, so, when we'll say the civilian era, so we'll say, late 45. Which is, there are 45, CJs, universals, but there were a lot of manufacturers that were contracted in to help build these Jeeps.
Right.
And here's the interesting thing: Purolator, Fram, Trico, your transmissions were Borg Warner. You had Brown Lib, or Dana, and then which became Dana Spicer. And all these, when you go into, Walmart and you see a Fram filter, a lot of guys go in there and they see something different, a different type of mentality. I look at that and I'm like, that's pretty cool that they're still around.
Yeah, it is.
It's right. And same thing with Trico. Trico was making the vacuum wipers. Now, they're not worth a damn when you're going uphill and they're all vacuum, relying on just manifold vacuum. But it's kind of neat to see these manufacturers that are still around today that are building this. Even Carter. Carter was making carburetors for the Carter WO. That's a classic, iconic working person's carb it was meant to do 8 hours of manual labor to put the Jeep there. And even you'll look at some of the logo for like PTO unit, there's a chain, and you'll see the Diamond logo, which is part of like Diamond Sugar. So there's a lot of hands after the war that wanted to be part of this iconic, vehicle. And just seeing it all come together and looking at everybody play together is so unique to the vintage Jeep community.
Now, you said something at the beginning of that I want to make sure I understand and to clarify. You referred to the Universal Jeep and CJ. Is the Universal Jeep the CJ?
It is. So, and the CJ, yep. So the CJ, like if you ever look at an old manual, it'll say Jeep Universal on it. And the CJ, stood for civilian Jeep.
Right.
Now, after World War II, you're going to notice that on those military Jeeps, you'll see 2 indentations, and they were called Pioneer tool indents. And one had a shovel, we had one that had an axe on it. When you got into that early 46, late 45, but mostly with that early 46, they still kept that. They still kept the Pioneer tool indents, which makes it so unique to put a shovel and an axe, on the side. They did change to a 3 on the tree, which, oh gosh, if they could bring that, that was so cool to drive.
Really, the 3 on the tree? Because I like the on the floor shifter a lot.
That was, well, so the cool thing is it's a very complicated design. It didn't last very long in the civilian CJ smaller market. It did carry into the trucks, the wagons, the FCs. They started having 3, but it's part of the experience of owning one of these things. It's all about, which makes it a lot different than like stuff newer today, where you get in, you hit the button and you go, so.
Very, very cool. All right. So when you say 1941, I'm thinking the military Jeeps. Are the 1941s only military Jeeps?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, that's what I'm thinking. So,
and that was a G503 contract. That was the government contract into the Jeep realm. And, trying to get the bid for that, so when John Willis, got the official contract, Bantam, tried to get that contract. But when, Willys Overland got the contract, well, there were so many being produced that they couldn't keep up with it. So who do they call? Henry Ford.
Right.
And of course, Henry Ford was like, I'm in, but Henry Ford was one of those guys that always loved to make it, do it, make it unique to him.
Yeah.
So the original Jeep actually didn't have what we're known today with the slots in it. It actually was a slants. It was welded bars. And Henry Ford, being a production, manufacturing guru, said, we're not going to do that. We need to stamp these things out. We had 9 slots in there, and basically sort of forced John Willis to say, listen, you're going to adopt our design. And you're going to notice that when 1942, a little bit of like 43 starts going, we started having a grill design, and we had 9 slots. And it wasn't until after the war that, John Willis, when he went ahead and started making these Jeeps in late 45, you're going to notice that some of these had a World War II grill. Well, Henry Ford, from my understanding, decided that we're going to send John Willis a letter, and we're going to say, you cannot use that design. That is my design. And remember, he used to F-script. Henry Ford used to F-script everything. So that logo, that little F that you see, I have a 42 GPW, and it's a time capsule. The fenders are stamped. The body is stamped. I mean, all over the place. He stamped everything. And one of his things was, if there's a problem with the Jeep, show me that it's an F stamp, F script on it. And if not, it's John Willis's problem. And the interesting, and he was kind of a bastard, when it came to that. I mean, a complete bastard. So when the Jeep Universal officially came out, John Willis wanted to use that grill, and the letter came out. He says, you can't do it. So what does John Willis do? Well, we're going to cut 2 out of there. We're going to make it 7 slots. And those are the slots that you guys are familiar seeing.
Interesting.
So it's actually a Henry Ford design. Henry Ford was the one who essentially came up with the Jeep grill that we all know and love today. John Willis just decided to take two out of it.
He remixed it so he could get around the copyrights.
Yeah.
kind of like we see those videos on TikTok and stuff where the lines going across it. It's there to confuse the AI. Right. So that's really good. I was actually going to ask you if you knew, and I said I'm going to leave him alone about that because he didn't know why we've got 7 slots now. But a lot of people don't know that. They don't know that it. They talk about the iconic 7-slot grill, and it is iconic, but that's not where it started. It started with more. Yeah. Yeah,
it started with more. It goes a little bit deep. And same thing. Part of here's an interesting thing. The Jeep Wave. So I know you guys do a lot of the newer stuff. So let's talk about, the Jeep Wave, right? You go down the road, you always wave. Well, that really started in World War II. So when the soldiers were in their Jeeps, they'd wave to each other. They would constantly, throw up a couple of hands, and it was whatever was convenient. I mean, I think some people do the 3 fingers, some people, go with the 5 fingers, stuff like that. But that was kind of a World War II thing. And it was your salute basically to your fellow man going down and say, hey, and Jeep guys back in the day, they had that camaraderie that we were out in the open. I mean, there's no armor. If you've ever been on an old Jeep, I mean, there's no armor to it. And there was a wave, and that carried in all the way to where we see today.
Well, the theory is, or they always say that handshakes were an indicator that you are friendly, and because you're giving your weapon hand to the other person, and you're not going to use your weapon, your sword, your mace, or whatever. I'm thinking that they were waving at each other, so just to show they didn't have the gun pointed.
Hey, listen, we're good. We're one of you.
Yeah.
And the cool thing is, like, even the Invasion Star. The Invasion Star was an interesting touch on the old Jeep. And the other cool thing about like the Jeeps, if you ever look at a World War II Jeep, sometimes you'll see blue in the lettering on the hood. I don't know if you've ever seen most World War II Jeeps, you're going to see and what they call an Invasion Star in white lettering. Right. We always see that, right?
Now, tell me what the Invasion Star is, because I don't know what that is.
So the Invasion Star is essentially the American troops coming out here and saying, we are coming here to invade you guys. It was kind of like an up yours, we're here.
Yeah, get the F out of the way. Here we come.
Yeah, get out of the way. The Allies are here. Now, the interesting thing is you will find Jeeps that will have blue on the side. So we'll have a number on the side, and they're blue. And it's like a drab type of blue. And the reason they did that is if there was a spy, and those were primarily domestic Jeeps, had the blue. And back in the day, we know it was black and white. If you took a photo of an old Jeep that had the blue lettering on it, the lettering would not come up. It would be blank. So they painted it dark blue, like this kind of like drab of a blue. So when you took a picture of it, you couldn't see the letters, because that defined where the Jeep is, what it's stationed, what its commission sorted to do, and they would take a picture. And spies would come in, they would take a picture, and it was like, to try, and all of a sudden, where's this go to? It's not on the pictures, and it always took a long time to develop those photos.
Right.
And it was kind of an interesting touch, back in that time era, and things of that nature. But
yeah, they were basically the limited technology. They were making use of that limitation.
Absolutely.
Okay, so now let me ask you another question. You seem to be have a wealth of knowledge on this. There is something that I saw recently that I had never read or heard before. I heard that Henry Ford wasn't painting the Jeeps correctly. He was not using the green that the military wanted. He actually used something that was a little more grayish or darkish color, and he did that because the paint was cheaper.
I have heard that. Now the thing is like what Henry Ford was one of those guys that wanted to deviate, make things cheaper, right? Yeah. And he used to fight with the Dodge brothers all the time. He hated the Dodge brothers. There was, he wanted his whatever he produced. I mean, think about it when it was Edsel and Ford. Right, you had your Model T, and he was dead set on what was the one saying? It was you can have any color you want as long as it's black.
Right?
Right, that's right. And then when Edsel came around and he was developing the Model T, they fought, and he wanted to change the colors and stuff like that. So I think there was some truth, and I could see Henry Ford just saying, "We're going to buy the cheapest paint. It's going overseas." And even back in that time, government contracts, they were really strict. We want this to be exactly what it is, and it was a part of unification and nationalism, for the war efforts. So
sure.
I think there is some times, because every now and then you go in some of these forums and like, where's this color coming from? How come we can't find it? And you would be surprised. I'm not surprised that there are maybe a different variation or something a little bit cheaper that he found in the cupboard. But he said, we're going to use the rest of this and spray it,
Well, and supposedly, I mean, it was a big hubbub during back whenever he was doing it, but he apparently made a lot of them, painted a lot of them wrong. And now, like around, God, I can't remember, 30,000 or something. And, and the article said that now they are collector's items because, they're different. And of course, that's what makes them collectible, is whenever they're different like that.
And even in like, when we start getting into like 1946, I mean, the colors changed, right? I mean, after World War II, Jeeps get decommissioned. So like my 42, the first thing when I got my 42, it was red. So a lot of the Jeeps after, World War II were decommissioned, the hood numbers were scraped, and they were painted different colors. Primarily, I normally see like red and yellow for some odd reason. And the first thing I wanted to do was scrape the hood and find these hood numbers, right? That's the first thing you want to do. What's the hood numbers? Where was it, located? But then after the war hit, the color selection was rather bland, I would say. And there was only, maybe, 4 or 5 different colors primarily. But what they did is those colors, like for instance, pasture green. If you ever look at an early 46, like my 46, mine's a Johnny Cash special, right? So the hood's an early 46, the grill's an early 46, the fenders are 48. And the colors that they chose were very unique because Jeep wanted to get into the agricultural side. So pasture green is very similar to John Deere. It's a little subdued.
Oh.
Right. And if you look at Harvard Red, very, very similar to New Holland, right? And then we had Picket Gray and then Potomac Gray. So there's a Harvest Tan, which is kind of neat. And when you're looking at these colors, they're very simple, but it was, Jeep coming into the market to try to find their way in and utilizing other manufacturers like John Deere, New Holland, anything, McCormick, that were, how can we get into this market? And they did a really good job. And, another thing with the Jeep Universal was you can use it 8 hours on the farm and you can now take it into town where you can't do that with a John Deere.
Yeah.
And that was a marketing thing, right? Go into town, take the Jeep when you're done. And they had PTOs on them, which is kind of neat, implements and so forth. So...
yeah, we were talking before we started recording about the side-by-sides, and you pay $80,000 for a side-by-side. And my comment is, I think side-by-sides are great, but I want to be able to go to Wendy's and buy a Frosty. And that's what you can do with a Jeep. You can get an old Jeep. Yeah, you can get an old Jeep. Now, I'm curious. Now, you said you had a 46, right?
I do. I have a 46.
What do you do with it besides go out and drink have a nice beverage, maybe sit in a chair, have a chat with it? What do you do with that? I mean, it's taking up garage space. There's absolutely nothing wrong with this, but what do you do with it? That's the thing that gets me is, I mean, I can buy a collectible. I can get a Jeep model or something and put it on the wall and admire it. But what do you do with this vehicle? Do you actually drive it? And is it dangerous to drive it? Because, you may have to be making parts for this thing if you drive it too much.
So the 46 is one of those vehicles that I kind of made it my own and extremely functional. So I kind of went out. Now I drive this thing every day.
Oh, interesting.
I drive it every day. In fact, one of my routines is I like to do deliver my packages to our local post office, and I take the 46. If it's a weekend, I'm driving it around. I mean, we may put, I think in one day we put about 100 miles on it, just driving it. Now, we did make it a little bit more functional. So, the original had 9-inch drum brakes, a single master cylinder, which means, what does that mean? You pop a brake line, you are dead in the water. You're done. Both of them, all the brakes are done. So we did convert it over to a dual master cylinder. So we have a split reservoir. We also changed the steering a little bit. We put a Saginaw box on it, something out of a 1972 CJ5 in there.
I bet you it steers a lot nicer too, doesn't it?
It's much more comfortable. Yes. Now it's manual, but the technology's a lot better. Now, the other thing is we did change the transmission. We did put a Warren overdrive on there. And the transmission's out of a Dodge, new process. It's a new process 435, which we're working with another supplier, helping him build his Jeep for the Easter Jeep Safari, which will showcase that. So we did make it much more functional. However, when you're inside, you still have that 1946. We're still sitting on top of 10 gallons of fuel, which many people don't realize. We're literally over 10 gallons of fuel. We still have to play with the choke. We still have to let it warm up. Now, the motor in that, we did have a World War II motor in that. When I got that motor, the motor was dated like September 4th, 1944. And we off-rode that motor for a long time up in the mountains of Pennsylvania until we found a beloved, one of my favorite motors, a Buick 225 Dauntless Oddfire, which has a very unique sound to it. It sounds like it has a cam. fire, fire, stop, fire, fire, stop,
Yeah.
it's truly iconic, and they fit perfectly in there. I mean, the motor is actually shorter than the flathead that came out of there, and it's lighter.
Oh, wow.
And you now have, 235 foot-pounds of torque at like 2,000 RPMs.
Mm-hmm.
It's wild. So it's a trip to drive, and you can now do 60 miles an hour instead of the classic 45. 50.
Well, yeah, you were talking about the overdrive. I went, wow, you can get it to 55.
You can do 55 now. And the cool thing that overdrive is you split the gears. So what's a 4-speed is, if you take into account just the 4-speed alone, not taking into account reverse, you have an 8-speed. So it's, first gear, overdrive, first gear, and then first gear, overdrive, second gear, and you're splitting the gears. So like when people look at my Jeep, they're like, what is all these shifters and levers and all this? And I said, well, we have two.
Science, that's what it is.
This is the fun part of it. But you got two shifters for the transfer case, what they call the twin stick. You got your overdrive, and we have our transmission. Now, when you get into the 48 that I have, well, we also have a PTO shifter in there to actuate a drum pulley on the back for a buzzsaw.
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people know what PTO is, but tell people what the PTO is. What does it stand for, and what do you use it for?
Sure. So it's called a power takeoff. So much like a tractor, it's a unit that hangs off of the transfer case. So the cool thing about like an old Jeep is, you ever talk about like the Jeep lean? Jeeps like to lean, and stuff like that. Well, everything's offset on an old Jeep. I mean, we have a transfer case, it's on an offset. The drive shaft actually is not straight, it's off on an angle. And we have this unit on the back. And what it does is when we go ahead and shift that, it engages a main drive gear that has little teeth, what we call chevrons. And now we actuate this PTO that goes through a drive shaft. And out the back of the Jeep, you're going to see this gearbox. And we can now put whatever we want. Now, in my case, I was very good friends with Carl Walk, and he was very close up in Bowmanstown. He was another Jeep supplier that retired. And I was able to get a drum pulley. So what is a drum pulley real quick, right? Back in the day, we had leather belts, right? Farmers would have the leather belts and it would drive, sickles and any type of implements that you want. Well, one of the implements that you would have was a buzzsaw. So you can now run, and I have one. I will admit, I do not use it. It's an open blade.
Even during Halloween, because I think the kids would love that, getting candy. Maybe you put the buzz right up close to where the candy is.
Yeah, I mean, it is. There's no shield on it. It's 27
Well, of course
inches.
not. It's men stuff.
Back when men were men.
That's right. And they were missing fingers.
Missing fingers. And then, you'll see guys no fingers on them and say, well, so you can run these implements on it. And it was interesting. I went to a Jeep show, and what he attached an ice cream maker. So he made an ice cream maker, put it on the back of a Jeep, and you can control the RPM of this thing. And he was making vanilla ice cream out of it. And it's super, super cool. Yeah.
Yeah, that is neat. So the power takeoff basically allows you to use the momentum from the engine, the power from the engine to run other implements. When you're running the PTO, can you also drive the vehicle, or is it either or?
You can drive the vehicle, but it's primarily set up for a stationary position. Now, some of these Jeeps, if you had a power takeoff, there was a governor on there. So you actually had a governor. You can pull and set your RPM. So much like when you're driving your lawnmower and you're going uphill and all of a sudden it raises the RPM, the Jeeps would do the same thing. You're sawing through a log. Next thing you know, the RPMs of the motor would go up, and you'll be able to carry in with whatever work that you're doing. So you can drive it. It's just the design on the back is not really conducive for kind of driving it like you normally would.
Right, but if you were going through a field or something and you had an instrument that you were using the PTO, you could be moving the vehicle while you're using the PTO.
Yeah, absolutely. In that case, yeah, and you will find like guys that are plowing down fields with like a sickle. They're using the PTO, and you're going through your field and doing what you need to do. So absolutely. So that's another thing that makes these things universal. There's so many things to it.
Well, I mean, there's a fitting. From what you were describing, there's a fitting on it, and whatever you can attach to that fitting, then you could. I mean, I would imagine you could come up with your own stuff. Is just attach it to that fitting and then use that tool.
Well, the other thing cool is you had Hobart welders of the 1940s. We all know Hobart, Miller, right? Welding machines. And what you can do is instead of having a gearbox on the back, right at that PTO, you can have a pulley or a chain drive. And you can put the Hobart welder, and you can now run the Hobart welder. The other thing, you'll see some old vintage pictures of guys running a lathe on it, like an old South Bend. They'll put these small lathes in there, and they'll go to farms and actually make parts.
Oh, it's perfect. You just go out there. It's like when they do windshields at your business. It's like that, but they're making parts. That's great. I mean, and of course even nowadays there's welders like with the bung welder, welder that you can get a dual battery setup, so you can do the same type of thing. But this wasn't using batteries. This was using the gasoline powered engine to drive it. Yeah. Which is a neat idea.
Super cool, right? So, and the neat thing is, like, the motors that were in these old Jeeps, they're a flathead, very similar to a Model T, extremely. And while they're not very fast and they're limited in RPM, they're a workhorse. They're essentially a tractor motor, and that motor was in the old Empire tractors themselves. That L134 that we call the Go Devil, but awesome motors all in all.
So, gosh, I was going to ask you this earlier. I suspect you do not have. I suspect you have an opinion, but I bet you do not have a definitive answer. And this is not technical. This is just fun. It's like the Jeep Easter eggs, which I found out there was actually Easter eggs on the early Jeeps as well, or at least one Easter egg. But we'll get back to that. Where did the name Jeep come from? Because they weren't called Jeeps during World War II, I don't think.
No, that's a tough topic.
See, I thought you were going to say, "Oh, that's easy."
Well, I mean, you had GP, right? And if you say that really fast, it comes across as Jeep. We had the reference to, Popeye. And
that's what I was going to say. It's Jeep. Jeep could go anywhere.
It can go anywhere.
Eugene the Jeep.
And so I think I'm going to go with the fact that, it was Jeep, a general purpose. It was quick. It came off the tongue very easily. I guess the best thing to do would be to ask, like, a World War II veteran, why did you guys call them Jeeps?
Right. And I bet you the majority of them would say, oh, that's just what I heard it called.
Exactly.
And we would never find the original person that was either brain damaged, drunk, or shell-shocked. when they mispronounced it and it just caught on. Well, we see the same type of stuff nowadays, even more so with social media. Things will happen. People will become famous over nothing. And I would imagine the Jeep name probably happened the same way. And the cool thing is, at least until we have time travel, we will never know. And actually, I think that's a good thing. It's nice to have mysteries.
Absolutely. And it keeps you thinking. That's the cool part about it. It keeps you thinking, but who knows? Maybe one of these days we'll figure it out.
Yeah. Now, I'm not trying to do a gotcha here, but do you know what, and this may be wrong, I don't know it, I just know it from the internet. Do you know what the first Jeep Easter egg was?
I do not.
So I read the other day, and maybe you can confirm or find out about this. I heard that the actual, the tread in the tires actually said Jeep, and I can't remember the specifics of it, but so you actually had to drive it out and on the ground, and you would see Jeep written in the dirt.
Really?
Yeah.
I think you may have thrown me off there. I mean, I know that the original tires were a non-directional tire. Which way am I going? You don't know if they're coming or going.
Right.
But it's funny. I will have to take my 48 now. Now that you mentioned that, I'm going to have to tell the wife that we're going to take the 48 in a muddy field, and we're going to try to find this Jeep here and take a picture of it and see what we actually have going on. But
I would imagine. I mean, then that's a good question. Are the tires when you get tires? If you want the tires to be period correct, can you still get tires? Is that something you guys sell?
Absolutely. Yeah, we do. We do offer the period correct tires for it. In fact, they were so period that you'll see Firestone on the side. So we actually get them from Coker. So we're real meticulous about kind of the parts that we rep, and one of them would be the tires. We try to keep things, we have an iconic Jeep. We want to keep it in-house here, and we do rep those classic non-directional tires that carried its way all the way into the M38s, which was a military Jeep, M38A1s, during that Korean War time period. But yeah, I actually have them on my 48.
That's really cool. I mean, because you need that look. How do they handle driving on it, especially with you driving yours daily? Is it kind of rough to, Jeeps are generally cantankerous to start with.
Okay, so go back to my 46. I do not have the non-directionals. I have steered away from there, and we use a swapper. We either have a swapper or an MTZ, a 35 on there. We actually put a 35 on there, but the 48 does have it. How do they? That's another loaded topic. Some will tell you that they handle great. Some will tell you that they don't handle good. I want to say it really has to do with tire pressure and the driver. Mm-hmm. There's a very good friend of mine, Stan Fuller. It is Grandpa's Jeep. You'll see him on YouTube. Probably most guys that are in the vintage Jeep community know who he is, and he runs non-directionals in Moab. A 700 tire in Moab, he will do things that the newer Jeep community probably would not touch. How crazy he is. And they have a lot of good traction. However, when it is snow out on the ground, we probably should put some chains on there and make that happen. So, but it all depends on the driver, I think.
Have you ever taken your 46 to Moab?
Oh gosh, I wish. I have not. So I got asked to go to Moab this year because we do have a lot of great supporters of vintage Jeep, or what we're doing, what we represent, what our brand represents. Like we kind of have a grassroots approach. However, it is being a small business, you work 12 to 14 hours a day. And
I don't want to hear complaints. I don't want to hear excuses here.
Yeah. Well, it's 34 hours. However, here's the cool thing. I do have a very good friend of mine that is Dave Delight of Quick Draw Jeeps. He's iconic. He's a classic cowboy Jeep owner that is building. We are helping him through parts and kind of expertise of building a Jeep for us. So when we go out there, and we're going to call it Rusty, by the way, it has a classic Rusty patina. He's building us a Jeep. So when we go out there, we will have a vintage Jeep. It's a Johnny Cash special. So parts of around the shop just going in there. The motor I don't think ran for maybe 20 years. They got it running. We're gonna wheel the piss out of this thing.
Don't call it Rusty. Call it Sue. I mean, that's a perfect name. It's a Jeep called Sue. All right. So I'm sorry. It's so much fun talking to you about all this history and other intricate items that we're talking about. Let's talk a little bit about the business, because I do this all the time. You're here. I'm sure you would like to talk about your business. That's vintagejeeper.com, folks. So at vintagejeeper.com, we established that you sell, you focus on 1941 to 1972 Jeep parts. What is your most, I guess, what is the thing that people look for the most that you guys have? And is it something that you have a lot of, or is it just, you better get over there and get it if you need it type situation?
That's a great question. So a lot of what we do is, so before, I'll give you a little thing. So before I was doing this, I worked in flow control. And I was rebuilding transmissions and carburetors and transfer cases. I was making parts for guys. And when I finally took the leap into doing this, which I've wanted to do for years, I was kind of known as the guy who did carburetors, rebuilding the carburetors, tuning them. I love tuning carburetors. I'm a big Weber guy. Guys that know me, But I would say a lot of the parts that guys are looking for are carbureted transmission rebuilding parts. That is literally goes back to before I even started, doing this. And then the innovation side that we have, meaning we make our own stuff that is kind of unique. And one of those things is a Weber conversion, like remember the old inline six, you'd have the Weber on it. We actually make a conversion kit for that.
My first Jeep was a 98 Cherokee XJ, and it was fuel injected by that time. So, but it definitely has the inline six.
Mm-hmm. And that was some of the things. So I think a lot of times, guys are looking for their restoration parts to kind of complete their build, and a lot of the kits that we offer. So when you're doing this such a long time, especially like on a service side, you kind of know what works and what doesn't work. So what we do is we put together packages to make life easier for the end user that's maybe coming into this and maybe not know how it works. So for instance,
that's a great idea, because this is what you're going to need if you're starting this thing. This is what we figured out, that this is the basics that you're going to need. And then they don't have to do a lot of research. They don't have to do anything other than just use the kit.
Yeah, and it's kind of like when we started this, I wanted to make sure that it was a value-added grassroots approach. And the vintage Jeep community is a very close community. It's funny, you could be on the internet talking to somebody through Facebook, for a year, and next thing you know, you're going to a Jeep event, and you feel like you've known the guy for 10 years.
Right.
So when you're doing this and you're building this, like one of the things like transmissions. I've been doing transmissions for, over 10 years, these old what we did was we put together a kit that encompasses all the parts needed to do this. However, we took it up a level where we said, we want to make sure that we're using good bearings, and we want to make sure that we're using parts so they're not throwaway, that they follow that grassroots approach to what it means that Jeep founded, right? So that you can use this reliably. And we started developing kits, and we took the best parts on the market and we put them together. Even the steering, we put together where we Rockwell hardness test with the original prints to make sure that they meet the specification and they're safe for the family.
Right.
So, yeah.
So let me ask you this. What is the one or maybe two, maybe even 10 parts that you cannot get that you would really like to have? Or do you just make them, damn it?
Oh, that's a tough one. That's a really tough one, because
just one is fine. You don't have to do 10.
Just one that would be, I would say if we can find rebuild parts, how about this? A T98 input shaft. And people are going to say, well, what is that?
Yeah.
So the T98 was the first low range compound first that everybody knows, like what T18s, that input shaft is, nobody makes it. And you could use that in not only in restoration side when you get to the CJ5, but when you get into what we call the stalker lockers. When you want to take a T18 and put a new input shaft on there, we can now do that. So it's a part that we've been thinking about making. It's a lot to it. There's a lot to it. Yeah. So, but we do have really good resources. Having the industrial side, that kind of part of me is I have a lot of cool people that I've worked with over the years to do casting, stamping, machining. So a lot of times I will machine my own parts in-house. One was an oil jet. So in an old motor, there's a little tiny oil jet that sprays oil on the gears. And I had a guy come up to me and he was like, hey man, where can I get this? And I was like, you know what? Let's get some 7/16 bar stock. And we're talking like 6 feet of this thing. And I spent like 8 hours trying to do this. It was like 7 different tooling. And we made these prototypes. And then now we sent them off for CNC. And I worked with a guy with some G code, the CAD software, to kind of do that,
right,
and make it happen. But also like the hot rod stuff. Like we have a vintage Jeeper line that's solely based for like hot rodding these old Go Devils. There's a guy known as Vic Hickey. He was a guy who bored out the motor 100,000 over. He put a little supercharger on it, trying to get the most amount of power. And another guy, Burns, who had a dual intake. and it had 2 Carter WOs sitting there. I mean, we're trying to put as much horsepower
that's nice.
into it, you know, and I mean, it's like this nut stuff. So one thing that we came up with was to put a Weber 32, 36, something that's classic on like a 258 motor. So when you look at that, you know, later 72, you had that the first, you know, introduction of the inline six. A lot of guys that have problems with those carbs, they normally throw a Weber on there. So I was like, challenge accepted. You know, there was a kit on the market, but it didn't work. The adapter didn't fit. And what I wound up doing was I had a block of aluminum and my mill, and I started making this 2-piece design. And it's kind of like a legacy product for me. I hold it dear to my, I actually have the first one I ever made. And when I get old and gray, I want to open up this box and just be like, this was super cool. It was a great time in your life to do this. And we made a 2-piece design where you take the old Carter off, you put this adapter on. And the quickest thing, it was an old timer. He goes to me, Sal, I put this thing on and I was on the road in 28 minutes. And I was like, oh my God. I said, that's why we engineered it. And you put a Weber in it. It's basically a 2-barrel. It's a progressive carb. So the first barrel is your primary. And then when you start getting to that 3/4 throttle, boom, it's all in, man. And it's got a cool little intake. So for the hot rodding guys, we do offer something kind of making it go a little bit faster down the road in these old motors.
So I got out of fast. I had a 72 Nova that I put a 327 in, and I learned why they did the 4-bolt mains in the Chevys. But it was so much fun. I didn't have near the money that I would have put into it if I can. But whatever you talked about the multiple carburetors, I remember the 2 4-barrel carburetor tunnel ram that you could put on there. It looked so cool. Yeah. And one of the common things was people would overcarb their motor, because the motor has to, it's an air engine. And if you're trying to force too much into it, it's just a waste. But damn it, it looks cool. Yeah. Oh yeah.
I get that all the time when, you know, guys are putting a Weber and it's a 2-barrel. And they're like, well, am I going to, you know, and it's huge.
Let's make it go really fast. Let's put an 8-barrel on it.
It doesn't. Well, the thing is like when we chose that, we chose different jet settings. And So the cool thing that, like, with a lot of the parts that we have and the innovation side is they're all touched by hand. We do it in-house. So when a guy orders, you know, the kit, I go downstairs and do it. I mean, it's early in the morning. It could be 5 in the morning. And, you know, we're making the modifications. Now, the jet setting that we came up with was almost about a year and a half in the making. I went up to, you know, Pennsylvania with a box of jets, and we went on different inclination, all this stuff.
Oh, fun. So you were changing jets as you were wheeling it. Yeah. You pull over, change a jet, and see what happened.
So the interesting thing, I remember one time I was going up in the coal mines in Reading Outdoors, and I'm going up, and she stalls on me. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And I'm like, we couldn't get this thing. It was either go up or roll back down. And I'm sitting here, I'm chucking a rock between the wheels, making sure, pulling the e-brake, and I'm changing the jets and the float to see, can we make this work? Because we didn't want to go, we were so far up.
Gosh.
And so it's super, super cool. But a lot of the stuff that we're doing, we're actually doing it in-house. You know, when we're putting together like a T90, which is the transmission, when we're doing the kits, I'm sitting there with the bags and the labels, and I'm labeling it for guys. This is the front thrust washer, or if there's a seal, this side in, you know. So, and that's one of the things that when we started this company, that we wanted a grassroots approach to try that. Like, if I have the knowledge, and that was the thing, I had a lot of cool old timers teach me a lot of this stuff. You know, I learned how to do carbs when I was working for a Jeep dealer. It was, you know, around the early 2000s. We still had old Jeeps coming there because it was a Kaiser dealer. It was back in like 54. It was an AMC dealer. So we'd have some Grand Wagoneers, and it was an old Irishman from New York. And we would tune some carbs, and he'd say, hey, polish this. It makes things go smoother. And that always resonated, that don't waste that knowledge. Don't hoard that.
Right.
You know, try to give it to people. And that's what the vintage Jeep community is really about, is sharing that knowledge. And we do that with our parts. And we always talk about the tech behind it. And if there's a problem with it, I'm all ears. I mean, we take somewhere 10 to 15 tech calls a day and just make sure that the part is right. the most important thing, make sure you're having fun.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
You have to have fun with it. It's frustrating, but you have to have fun.
Yeah. Oh, it's very frustrating, but it's so encouraging, so fulfilling whenever it works. Well, what a lot of the kids these days consider fulfilling is social media. Is there a place, and we mentioned vintagejeeper.com, the website. Are you guys on social media? And if so, where can they find you?
Yeah, so one of the things is we started a Facebook page, which is just Vintage Jeeper, and then we got into Instagram. I'm a mechanical type of guy. I kind of get myself in the garage and do my thing. So when we started, somebody was like, "You got to start an Instagram page," and I was like, "Sure." So it's vintage_Jeeper. And, at first it was a little rough. You didn't know, what the platform, how you're going about doing it. And then what we did was we just started catering around new product designs, things that we're making, rebuilds. We started doing a little bit of tech. I think the Facebook side, we do a little bit more tech on there because you're kind of limited with the Instagram platform.
More wordy, more pictures and stuff. Yeah.
But I'll tell you what, once we found that feature to put music and animation on the Instagram, that was a game changer. I was like, so, I'll be sitting on the couch, and the wife's reading a book, and I'm going through, different music and, what caters towards this. And she's like, "What are you doing?" I was like, I got to make sure that the music matches, what we're doing.
You're a producer now. You're a producer and director.
You wear many hats, man.
Yeah. You have to these days.
Those are the two main platforms. Yeah.
And actually, the computers, the phones, all this stuff makes it easier for a single individual to do many things. Now, I don't think that I've ever mentioned this before, and I'm not telling you need to advertise the Jeep Talk Show, but you talk about the little logos and stuff that you can add on Instagram. So there is several Jeep Talk Show logos that bounce and spin and do everything. So the next time you're doing images, whether you post it on there or not, go in there and you have the images up. You know how you can do a search on the images? Yep. Just type in Jeep Talk Show, and you will see all the Jeep Talk shows that pop up. And I don't even use them that often myself, but I went through that process.
That was the other thing is that, one thing, with the Vintage Jeeper stuff is we love supporting others.
Yeah, we do too. We're the same way.
We love that stuff. Like even the Dispatcher magazine, which I write for, and I started writing for a magazine called Flat Fender Aficionado Monthly. And it's a Jeep guy who's a very good friend of mine, Travis Bunch. Him and his spouse started a magazine that is solely centered around flat fenders. And I started writing tech articles, and I loved doing that stuff. I used to write industrial publications, so I kind of gravitate towards that, articulating in that fashion. And when it came to the Dispatcher, which is a magazine put on by Bill Norris, it's a really nice, classy magazine, something you would want to toss on the coffee table, really
I was going to ask you if this was a physical paper magazine, and from what you say, it is.
It is a paper just like the old JP magazine. And we do tech articles where we talk about seals and we talk about how to rebuild an overdrive. And I just, I love writing that stuff. So, and we try to promote them too, where we're putting, the old subscription forms, like Reader's Digest, type thing. And we put them in the box and kind of anything that we can do to promote, people that, in all aspects of the Jeep community is really what defines being a Jeep owner, whether it's old or whether it's new.
Well, I was talking about Reader's Digest. You should put a crossword puzzle in it, but all the answers have to do with vintage Jeeps.
That would be awesome. Actually, that's a good idea. And if we do that, we're gonna call you up and tell you that we're doing it.
So I bet you there's a website that allows you to generate a crossword puzzle based on a list of Jeep things, and you could actually come up with the questions. I bet you there's a website that does that. So, So if you don't mind mentioning, do you have a website address for the vintage, not the Vintage Jeeper, what's the magazine? The first one you mentioned.
So it's one is Flat Fender Aficionado Monthly. Right. I think it's flatfender.com. It might be flatfender.com.
God, I hope so, because I can't spell aficionado.
Neither could I. But the other one is the Dispatcher magazine.
Dispatcher, right.
Yeah. And you can Google it. It'll come up and all that stuff. And then we're going to start we're actually redefining our website. We're finally outgrown the website that we're on, and we're going to go ahead and kind of do a different website for us. We've outgrown that. In 3 years, we've got to go a little bit bigger. And for our website, we started posting a lot of tech related stuff. So the old technical service bulletins, we started putting that, the original manuals, and a bunch of tips and tricks and things to kind of help you build your old Jeep.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. I was just looking up the Dispatcher magazine to see if I could tell what the website is. It looks like it's Dispatcher magazine, all spelled out.com.
Yeah.
Well, Sal, thank you very much for being with us tonight. And obviously, we're going to have you back because we spoke so much about all this wealth of knowledge that you have. I hope you can come back. And I always tell people when they come back, you know what you're getting for. So if you came back, it means you're okay with it.
I like it. I appreciate it. Thank you for the invite. And this was a pleasure.
Great. Thank you. Have a great night.
Great. Have a great one. Take care. Bye.
Broadcasting since 2010.
You're my friend. You're my new friend.